While we wait, any newcomers on the call today? Please, so we have this tradition where you go ahead, introduce yourself. Yeah, Shivam, go ahead.
Hi Shruti, my name is Shivam. I'm a third year engineering student from India. I just joined the community a few days back and I joined this call today to understand the community and to understand the agenda and the project on which we are trying to work right now.
Great. We will get you up to scratch and we'll get you started. All right. As we go ahead with the introductions, please go ahead and add your name to the attendees list, or I'll do that for you soon enough. Uh, Navendu, if I'm pronouncing that right. Have you been on call with us before?
Yeah, hi,
Hey,
Navendu. No, no, this is my first meeting, and I joined the community like a day before yesterday. So I'm from India, and I'm just starting into cloud native development. Yeah,
nice. Have you worked? What have you worked with before?
I have done some front end engineering and some Node.js and Python stuff, and like I haven't tried like Go and like and I have like really deep dived into Kubernetes and Docker, so I'm hoping to do that.
Nice. I think you were looking for tutorials before. Did you find them? I'm picking on you a little bit more, I think. But if you haven't found the tutorials yet, please do ping me on Slack. I'll help you. All right. Bami, I think you've been in call with us before. So I'm not gonna harass you this time. We're 8 minutes in. Let's start. Rodolfo, hey, you have a topic for us today?
Hey, yes, good morning, you all. I have a topic to talk about today is about Cypress and how to write initial tests. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Just a second.
Okay. Do you see my presentation?
Yep, I do.
Okay. So today I will talk about how write tests with Cypress. We recently integrate Cypress to the Meshery project. Let's do a quick introduction about Cypress. Cypress is a framework to do end-to-end tests, integration tests, and unit tests, and we have all together in one tool. Before Cypress, we usually have to choose and install an assertion library like Chai or Spect, install Selenium to talk with the browser, additional libraries like Xenon, Selenium wrapper like Nightwatch, for example, that it was too slow, and choose a framework like Mocha. So with Cypress, we remove all these tools to install, and we only install Cypress. The folder structure of Cypress, we have two folders Cypress in the Meshery project. We have one in provider UI and in the UI folder. This folder structure is from the provide UI, where we select the provider for Meshery. The first folder is fixtures. Here we will write all the mock data that we will use for the integration or unit test. In the integration test, here we have all the tests that we will write: integration, unit, and end-to-end test. Also, we have a plugins folder where we can configure environment variables, preprocessors, and screenshot handling. And talking about the screenshot, all the images are stored when the test fail. So this is a huge advantage of this, because if our tests fail, uh, we can see the image to know what happened. The other folder is support. Here we will write some commands to help us, like the login function, because all of the tests or most of the tests we have to do login to the application in order to test another parts of the system or the application. So here we can write a command to login in order to have or to reuse some code. And finally, we have videos, the videos folder, and there is storing all the videos of our test that we are running. For example, in the right side, we have here the provider UI spec.js.mp4. So we can see all the videos of our test. I have to mention that these videos and screenshots are not uploading to GitHub because they are in the .git ignore, so we can only visualize them in local. Now, how to write test? The first thing that we have to do is create a file to the test itself, like sample underscore spec.js. So here we have to have this name underscore spec.js in order to be detected from Cypress. Next, we will have to write the test. We will use describe and it that come from Mocha in order to write the test. The first parameter is the identifier of the test, that is a string, and the second parameter is a callback. So after that, we have to do the instruction about the expects or the assertions, like here, like we expect true to equal true. That is very simple test. So this is the first or the most easy test that we can write, a describe, a need, and an assertion. So and here in the right side, we have another test, like it's a little bit complicated. We are testing the provider UI. And here in the individual test, we are testing that renders the provider component correctly. So first, we visit the root path that in this case is taken from the base URL from cypress.json. And in the case of the provider UI, is located in localhost 3001. So first we will visit this URL, then we will select an UI element. In this case is data cg equals root. And then we expect an assertion that should exist. Um, let's put attention about this. We can chain one or more functions with cg. For example, we have cg.get, and when we write should, we don't have to put again cg. We only put dot should. So we can change multiple Cypress function in one cg line. So uh, this is the one aspect of Cypress that we can change cg function. And as I mentioned, the recommended way to select UI elements is to add a attribute of the to add an attribute to the HTML elements, that is the data CG. And this is because if we put an ID or another attribute, it can change later. And if we only specify an attribute that is for Cypress, we can ensure that it will not change in the future. Let's talk about more about this. This is an image from the Cypress docs page, and the recommended way is this last one, to have an extra attribute to the HTML element that is specified or and only exclusive for Cypress. So it's very isolated, this one. Sometimes we cannot add an attribute. For example, in Meshery, we're using material UI for some components. So those components don't accept another attribute. So we can um, use another function that is contains that we will search about the submit word and then interact with them. This is better. This is less better, but yeah, it's a way to do that if we cannot add another attribute. There are two that are like warning that is not too recommended, but we can do. There is select an UI element with another attribute like name. For example, name equals submission. Or we can select the element using the ID, for example, hashtag main. And there are two things that we have never have to do. That is to select the UI elements by selecting the SSS selector, like .btn, .btn large, because this can change in the future and is not isolated. And also we can, it's not recommended to use the types of the UI elements, like button only. Because if we have five buttons in the UI, which button we have to click one. So yeah, this is the worst way. And you can read more about this in the Docs Cypress page in the section of best practices. Now let's talk about the test runner. Cypress has a test runner. In order to execute all the tests, we have npm run cg open command in order to open this test runner. Here we will see all the tests that we have, like first test or provided by spec, and then we can select the browser to use, like Chrome, Firefox, or another. And when we select a test to run, we will see this page. Like in the right side, we will see the React or the frontend app, and in the left side, we will see the test running. That in this case, it passed. It takes 1 second, around 1 second, and we can see that it passed. But let's see this in a in a real demo, right? Instead of watching images. So the first thing that we need to do is to execute the frontend app with make room provider wide def, for example, and then we will execute the test runner with the command of npm run cg open. With this command, we will open the test runner application, and here we have already 3 tests. Let's execute the first test spec that we saw before. So if we click this one, the test will load, and uh, as we see in the image, the test passed. Here, I have to mention that we have a selector playground that if we click this one, we can see the selector of the white elements in order to be used by the test. In this example, for example, I added the attributes data CG to the React app equals to root in order to test that this component renders correctly. So this selector is very useful because it allows to have the selector of each element. So it's very useful. Also, we have a button to run all the tests again in order to see what happened. And let's see another test that is a little bit complicated. Here we are render again the component, the root component, and then we are selecting a provider. For example, here is the select provider, and in the left side we can see all the steps. And another interesting thing about Cypress is that we can go past or have a timeline to see what happened. For example, at the beginning we have Meshery in the provider. So we select the arrow function or the button of the arrow, and then we click, and we have snapshots also that have the before and after steps. So we can see what happened before and what happened after we execute the instruction in Cypress. So we selected, in this case, none, and then we click on none, and we can see that the provider changed. And this test that we can select a provider, and the provider is displayed here in the bottom. So it's very friendly to the developer or the QA engineer in order to test what happened. If we want to run all the tests, we click this button again, and here we see that it takes 1 second 87. So there are two tests, and if we click back in the back arrow, we see again all these tests. And as you mentioned before, we are running in Chrome 85, but we can select the browser that we want to test. This connect to our local browser. So if you want to test another browser, you have to install in your system. So what's next? If you already write your first test, I recommend you to read the documentation of Cypress. It's very and it has videos like here of how to write your first test. So I recommend to read all the documentation about Cypress. And also there is a section about best practice that is it recommends you how to write a better test and to have maintainable tests in a project. So these guys are very explained, so you can read them. Also, I found a YouTube video from Brian Mann that talks about Cypress best practices uh, from the AsterJS conference. So it's very helpful that talk and very funny too. And that's all, I think. Do you have any questions?
Anybody? Questions? I'll actually have to go look at the presentation again to be able to ask questions. Lee?
I do. Me. Oh, for, first of all, I'm blown away at the presentation. This was awesome. This is. I know for sure that I'm speaking for the vast majority of your rather large audience today. That most folks on here aren't familiar with Cypress, and that is just the kind of introduction that the crew here had needed. I particularly enjoyed one thing that's always kind of bugged me. So congrats on the presentation. Like we'll get some mileage out of this thing. That was great. I was hearing some compliments last night, Rodolfo, on some of the tests that you'd written already. One thing that has always bugged me kind of perpetually about test frameworks like this has been their fragility, which is exactly what you spoke to in the screenshot that you took and said, like, hey, there's a number of ways that you can tie in this test suite, or Cypress into the user interface elements. These elements were meant for human interaction, but if you're going to do it programmatically, here's how you can marry up the two, your tests, and here's how you can do it in a way in which doesn't become fragile. Like if you moved, so some of the test suite or frameworks like this used to, and it's still relevant and still can be good sometimes, but some of them would say, all right, so the test is to move the mouse to this coordinate on the screen, assuming that the screen is running at a certain resolution, and then invoke a click there. And it's like, wow. As soon as you move that component around, or someone looks at it in a mobile view, or like what, so one thing, it strikes me that as a project, we should draw a line somewhere and say, unless under duress, we wouldn't incorporate tests that use, the basically bad practices or use fragile practices. It was also very interesting to hear that you'd highlighted that, like, hey, here's the best practice. If you're totally clean here, you're totally free and clear if you take this approach. Now, the caveat to this approach is that, and this is my question, is that is it that there are certain React components that we're using that don't afford for the ability to, like, can you further qualify where we're going to have to potentially move from the best practice to the second best, like when?
Sure. Let me share some code. Here we have the provider Y component. So for example, we are using, like, let me see. Um, for example, this button. This button is taken from material Y component. If we go up, this button is from material Y core. So this component is not too flexible to add another attributes that this component already have, like autofocus and on click. There are attributes that already have the component. But if we have to add, for example, the best practice that is data CG equals to select provider, for example. And if we save this here, we can see that this will not work. Let me open a new browser, because this component from material doesn't have another, or the ability to add individualized attributes. So let me go to here. And if we visualize the source code and click on the button, for example, we can see that we have I will move this one to visualize better. In here, in another button that has area label, select provider. So we will add this data CG attribute, and we have, for example, if we actualize the page, we can see here that we have the area label. In this in this example, it works. We can add that data CG attribute, but in some items we cannot add because the React component just drop that. But yeah, we the best practice is to add this attribute.
Makes a lot. Yeah. Okay. Point of confusion for me right now. Are you using Firefox or are you using Chrome? And actually, Rodolfo, sorry to interrupt, but you're on mute.
Sorry. We can use either Chrome or Firefox. Right now, I am using Chrome because I like the dev tools, but you can use both.
Gotcha. And nice. So it probably goes without it goes it goes without asking the question that hey, this test framework, Cypress, is the framework of choice for the Meshery project. And just like beginning to enforce coding conventions and certain lint checks when people are contributing Go or React code, at some point we'll finally mature to where we're starting to require unit tests, which would also mean like, and actually in some, I don't know, in some respects, you could argue that it's the integration tests that are able to be performed with a framework like Cypress that are maybe the more important or the most important ones. And at some point, we want to begin building a good practice of when a new feature is added, a new button is added, or a new hyperlink or whatever that that these tests are adjoining. and hence, in part, this tutorial will be highly referenced in that regard, but it also probably means that there will be the need for a bit of continued education, and maybe I'll just speak for my part, to to come to learn this more, for this to be kind of built into the development process of like, um, and so I have a request. So you haven't done enough yet. I have another request, which is there's a contributor guide or two. There's a contributor.md that articulates a few things. I think it could be better. Um, there's also a separate, there's a separate There's a separate document I know for Meshery documentation. It's documentation of the documentation, meaning it says it's built in Jekyll and you do these things. And if you want to use a clipboard function, do this. And I don't know that does anyone on the call know if we have one yet for Meshery UI? Like the fact that it's using Material UI and Next.js but this practice should be part of that. It should be, hey, we're using Cypress. Here's the considerations. Uh, you know, we want to enhance our contributor docs on this. I don't know that we've got the. It's amazing with as many folks as we have on the call. I don't know that anyone is able to answer that question about whether or not we have documentation, contributor documentation that's specific, that goes into a lot of specifics about the componentry, the UI frameworks that we're using in Meshery UI, which is both bad because there aren't a lot of people to speak to it, but it's also bad because it probably means that we don't. Like, so your name's on my list, Rodolfo. We're gonna go do that.
Yeah, no problem.
Who else has questions? Who has used Cypress before? Is anyone, is this familiar to you already?
Ayush, you had a hand up? Did you want to ask a
Yeah, I
question?
had a question. Yeah, I had a question with Rodolfo. And Lee, for your question, no, I have not used Cypress. Rodolfo, just one thing, since I'm not very familiar with Cypress, but I in React we often use multiple components and reuse them, right? So let's say that I'm using a similar component and two buttons are similar in the aspect that no ID or class are different for them. So do I include this Cypress test in the div or in the actual element itself?
You include it as a prop that you can pass to the component. No, in the component inside itself. Instead of
Uh-huh.
that, pass as a prop.
Yeah, passing as a prop, but then again, though, let's say the two UI elements are similar in the respect that they have similar props other than this testing framework, right? Now this testing will also be same because we are passing data CY, uh, right?
Yeah, can I go to the code like an example? For example, if we create this little component about Buron, and
Uh-huh.
your question is about if we should include or not include this attribute, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes we can create React components inside, like passing something like this, that will allow us to pass another attributes that are not um, defined before. For example, in this case, in the button
Yeah, in
button,
actual yeah, in the actual component definition of button, right? I extra props, you're
yeah,
saying that.
yeah, this one in the extra props, we can configure that in our React component in order to have this data CG attribute.
Mhm. I'll leave at that because I don't think so that I can answer the I can ask the question accurately. Thank you.
So maybe last comment from me, and actually there's a question in the chat as well. Um, can we use Jest for Cypress testing?
I think we can implement yes, but I have to do a research in order to validate that.
And that question is coming from Pratik, not me. So I don't.
Check. Okay. I have something to say. Check. I've read about testing before. There is unit testing and end to end. And with just is good at unit tests. It's good. And also Cypress is very good at with end to end tests as it tests the UI from start to end. However much I've just read the documentations, not implemented yet, but I can. I've seen Rodolfo good with Cypress. We can try to interact, so I can also add on what I know, so we can push out something good. But with Jest is good at unit testing, and then Cypress is good with the end-to-end testing. As it tests the UI, you've seen it clicks, checks if the statement or paragraph contains a word you like a keyword you wanted. Sort of, yes, that's what I have.
Yeah, we can do a research in order to validate if we can use yes. I think that we can, but let's let's do the research.
Also, with writing unit tests, kind of gets lengthy. It is much needs much more work. But with end to end, you can write a few tests to work around and finish with time. Unit tests you can integrate them with slowly by slowly, but you can't rely, you may not rely on them for testing performance.
Um, nice, Usama. I don't know that I actually heard what you said, but one other thing that I'll call out that's kind of interesting about a framework like Cypress, and it's not necessarily specific to Cypress, but when you think about the one of the functionalities that Meshery provides is interacting with service endpoints. It focuses on performance and identifying latency experienced, how much throughput a given service can have. I was tardy to this call because myself and a couple of other members here were meeting with Nighthawk maintainer to do distributed load testing. So not in a couple of ways, not just hitting one endpoint, but multiple endpoints at a time. Also not just having a single load generator, but having multiple load generators all hitting at the same time. Some high fidelity, some really interesting insights can be garnered when you're taking signals, when you're taking readings from different locations. That relates to this functional testing in so much as it's not just performance that you're going to want to understand and manage about a given service endpoint. You're also going to want to know, I mean, as you go through, if you consider like making a new software, new release of software, There's a few things that you want to know about that software when you make that new release. You want to inspire confidence into users as they download it and use it or as they consume it. That you'd want to do some regression testing on performance. Like, hey, is this thing just as performant as it was, or did we regress as we added new functionality? You're going to want to um, verify functionality, which is what we're talking about with Cypress. You're going to want to say, well, hey, this next version, maybe a couple of things. One, it actually works. Two, it is backwards compatible. Like it did the same thing that it did before, but it also added some new stuff or whatever. There's various promises that you make as a producer of software to your users. And so I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but not only is it good for Meshery as a software project to incorporate best practices like automated functional testing using Cypress, but it also might be quite interesting to leverage Cypress just as we leverage different load generators to analyze the performance of a service endpoint. It might be, it's worth a thought to understand whether or not combining functional tests alongside performance tests would be helpful to users. I would contend that, like, yes, very clearly that's helpful. Why? Well, because when you, if you want to test the performance of an endpoint, and that's what we let people specify today, we'll let them specify some number of HTTP headers, which is good because maybe you need to pass along a cookie. Like maybe the endpoint you're trying to test is you have to be signed in to get to that endpoint, the user does. And maybe there's a difference between the users, maybe you need to pass along a JWT and different user attributes. You want to do different functional tests, like, yeah. And so the headers only take us so far. Those are HTTP, not necessarily some other protocol. So to be able to build in not all of Cypress's capabilities, but to be able to build in some amount of a cross between functional tests. You want to do a performance test, not just simply by doing an HTTP get of an endpoint. Like you're going to want to post things. You're going to want to do more than just post things. You're going to want to click a particular button. Maybe you want to do a series of things in order and analyze the performance. What Cypress is telling us here is, yeah, hey, it's facilitating a deep level of invoking certain actions in order and confirming whether or not, and actually this is a good question for you, Rodolfo, but I'm assuming it sort of confirms that the response back from the app was a 200 or a something. And I assume that some of that's configurable. To end the thought on Meshery, what I'm saying is, like, it's the same thing that you would want while you're testing performance. You want to test a series of endpoints in a functional way to understand performance. So good thing for everyone to think about a bit. And then, yeah, Rodolfo, if you want to speak to how, yeah.
Yeah, we can test some endpoints. In this case, we are studying the response, passing a JSON file, but we can test, like, for example, this API provider's endpoint, like get, post, put, or delete. And we can also, as you mentioned, Lee, we can test the response if it was 200 or 400 not found, any HTTP status. So we can do that with Cypress. But on the other hand, um, of the performance test that you mentioned, I think we can, I think that we can research about a tool for do performance tests, because I think they are different from the UI tests. So maybe the performance test is more like backend, in the backend part, or maybe we can combine them in order that click this button and call this endpoint and receive the result and measure the time of that response. Maybe we can combine, but I think we can do a research for how can we test performance endpoints.
That in part that begs the question. So Cypress itself, we're invoking these tests as part of a continuous integration process using GitHub Actions, just invoking a workflow. That's invoked, I think you demonstrated it earlier, as a developer of functional tests, you might want to leverage a browser plugin to verify that the tests you're writing work and do the thing that you're looking to do. But as you go to automate that in continuous integration, is it CI that how are those tests being invoked in our CI?
We run the exact command with npm. We run npm cg run, and this cg run is like a headless command that it doesn't require a browser UI. It only runs the tests in a headless mode, for example, in Electron. So this is running in the workflow of GitHub, and the same as we see now is running in the GitHub workflow. We execute npm run cg run.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that's right. You said it before. Interesting. Nice, okay. Other thoughts, questions for Rodolfo? So good, Rodolfo. As a follow-up, let's go identify where we should write down some of the things that you just said. By the way, I got thanks. The slides look great. Like I love to see the template in action.
Yeah, thanks to you for attending. And if you have more questions later, just share it with me in Slack, in some channel or in private.
Nice. And then, yeah, thank you, Rodolfo. To follow it up, I'll say to the extent that everyone can do it publicly, all the better, for all the reasons that were articulated by Pratik on Friday. Back to you, Shri.
Thanks, Rodolfo. Moving on. Lee, we have one topic from you from the last call.
Maybe we can end 5 minutes early because I think this is probably just a 5-minute topic. Or if anyone has any other topics, now's the time. Post it in the meeting minutes. We'll get to it. Briefly, there was a community manager that had suggested that maybe a meeting focused on DevOps as another work stream or as another meeting to hold every once in a while might be of interest. There are a number of community members that join that highlight the fact that they're looking to hone in their DevOps skills, which feels a bit odd to kind of use the word DevOps, to describe hey, like mostly like getting better with Docker, with Kubernetes, with cloud-based deployments, with like basically getting better at tools and tooling. GitHub Actions probably falls into that. Service meshes, running the infrastructure, operating the infrastructure, doing ops better. So if that's of interest to you, or you think that that it would be good to share and exchange as a community on, I can imagine topics in there being things like platform compatibility discussions of Meshery and maybe how Meshery deploys. Meshery deploys in containers today. You can deploy those on Docker or Kubernetes, but there's a lot of nuances and variances to that. I could see that being a topic. And briefly speaking of that topic, I'll say I was meeting with Docker's CEO yesterday, and we're discussing some roadmap. And some of that roadmap was in and around Docker Compose as a way of describing an app, which is how Meshery kind of got its initial start as being described as Docker Compose. But yeah, so just anyway, put your +1s in the meeting minutes if you think the DevOps topic is a good one. I will admit, and this takes a lot for me to admit this, but I'm getting stronger, and that is that my plate overflows. For my part, like I'm dropping balls on the ground, and for my part, I don't think I could that my calendar could sustain another topic. That doesn't mean that there's a reason why we put a lot of framework into place to build out a community that scales and to let the community self-drive. And so you guys already have the Thursday meeting, the one tomorrow, the newcomers meeting. That wasn't my doing. Some of you grabbed the reins and went off and created a meeting that's pretty popular. So the same thing potentially for DevOps. I'll throw that out there. Anybody have anything else today? What are we doing on Friday? Does anybody know if we've got, what we've got on the agenda for tomorrow and Friday?
For tomorrow, we have a tutorial. The topic is not exactly decided yet, but it'll probably be something of an FAQ session.
Okay.
Nupur and I were working on that.
Nice.
We'll have something by today. And for the Friday meeting, I'm not sure yet. A demo of the Nginx adapter, if it is working now.
Nginx service mesh adapter, that would be.
Yeah. I'll have to go ask Abhishek. He is involved.
Yeah, so it's not currently done yet.
Can hardly hear you, but I heard you say it's not exactly done. Hey, that's fine. You've got 2 days, no problem.
Yeah.
I'll go look for other topics if that can't be done. And we can have a poll for the DevOps meeting on Slack, I suppose.
That's good.
All right, let's end it earlier today for once in the entire year. Thank you for coming on, everybody. See you tomorrow. If you are interested in tutorials or if you're a newcomer in the community, please join us tomorrow it's still at 8 a.m. Central. If it's not, please check the meetings table on the website. You'll get a reminder on Slack too. And for the community meeting, please do join us on Friday as well. Thanks for coming in. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you, Rodolfo. It's awesome.
Bye. Thank you to you.
Thanks, Rodolfo.
Bye.
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 Everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.